Hi, welcome to our YouTube-friendly version of NTD News. What you'll see here is only the content that YouTube allows. For our complete, uncensored broadcast, head on over to ntd.com. See you there. Escaped prisoner Daniela Cavalcante is now in custody. He was captured in Pennsylvania after a 2-week manhunt and multiple sightings.
I'm pleased to be able to report that thanks to the extraordinary work of law enforcement officials from here in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, our local leaders here in Chester County, and from our federal partners all across this nation, shortly after 8 a.m., our suspect was captured.
Jail video shows Cavalcante escaping by crab walking up a prison wall. The illegal immigrant had just been sentenced for killing his ex-girlfriend and was awaiting transfer to state prison, while also wanted for another murder in Brazil. An aircraft detected body heat in the search area at around 1 a.m. It had to stop following the signal due to a storm, but police surrounded the area while they waited out the weather. Afterwards, they moved in and surprised the fugitive. He then tried to crawl through a wooded area with a rifle he stole, but a police dog found him. No shots were fired, but Cavalcante was lightly bitten by the dog. Now he'll serve out a life sentence. An unprecedented meeting on Capitol Hill today as tech tycoons like Elon Musk and Mark Zuckerberg huddle with senators. NTD's Iris Tao joins us live from Washington, D.C. Good evening, Iris. What did lawmakers tell us about this closed-door meeting?
Good evening to you. So today's meeting lasted a whole day behind closed doors, and senators, including leading senators like Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer, came out to talk to us right after it ended, saying that they talked about a variety of issues, including how to increase transparency in the AI industry and how to mitigate risk associated with some AI techniques such as deepfake and what's known as watermarking, and how such techniques could be used to influence things like elections. And Schumer also told us that today the main theme is really how to, through taking bipartisan actions on regulating AI, how to ensure that American public can enjoy the benefits associated with AI, but also to mitigate the risks associated with this fast evolving technology. And of course, today's meeting was so significant because it really drew together all the biggest names in this industry, including Elon Musk, Mark Zuckerberg, as well as Bill Gates. And today, Elon Musk in particular told the public that today's meeting was historic. He also warned about the dangers of AI. Watch.
I think the consequences of AI going wrong are severe. So we have to be proactive rather than reactive. There is some chance that above zero that AI will kill us all. I think it's low, but there's some chance.
So several senators told us that they really appreciate this rare opportunity to directly listen to these leaders of the AI industry to learn more about this. But also there are some critics of today's meeting, including Democratic Senator Elizabeth Warren, who told me that she did not understand why today's meeting was held behind closed doors. But still, senators including Chuck Schumer told me that they think today's meeting was very productive and that it could help the U.S. in its competition with China. Watch.
And the fact that we can bring everybody together and come with legislation that would move things forward on both sides will help us significantly.
There's not a world in which China can put that room together. Like, the government in China is trying very hard on AI, but the leadership in AI is in the United States of America.
And Schumer says that he's going to have more open hearings on this topic of AI in the near future, and we're certainly going to see more actions by Congress on AI very soon. Back to you.
Iris, thank you for that update. Republican Senator Mitt Romney of Utah will not be running for re-election next year. He made the announcement in a video message on X today.
I've spent my last 25 years in public service of one kind or another. At the end of another term, I'd be in my mid-80s. Frankly, it's time for a new generation of leaders. They're the ones that need to make the decisions that will shape the world they will be living in.
Romney is 76 years old. In his video message, he outlined a range of what he described as critical issues, including rising national debt and the climate. The senator criticized both President Biden and former President Trump. He said neither Biden nor Trump are, quote, leading their party to confront those issues. The senator has long been an outspoken critic of Trump within the Republican Party. His current term ends in January of 2025. And speaking of politicians' age, a columnist for the Washington Post is offering his thoughts. In an op-ed, columnist David Ignatius argued that President Biden is too old to run again in 2024. Ignatius said he doesn't think Biden and Vice President Harris should run for re-election. He pointed to voters' concerns over Biden's age and Harris's low approval ratings. Biden is currently 80 years old and would be 82 at the beginning of a second term. The columnist called Biden's age a big liability and said it's become the subject of dinner table conversations across America this summer. As to Harris, the columnist said she, quote, failed to gain traction in the country or even within her own party. Ignatius touted what he considers Biden's achievements, but said that Biden withdrawing from the 2024 race would be a wise choice for the country. Republican presidential candidate Vivek Ramaswamy is laying out his plan to cut the federal government and the laws to back him up. He says he'd start by cutting federal employees by 75% and shutting down several agencies. NTD's Jason Perry has the details.
People who we elect to run the government ought to be the ones who actually run the government.
Speaking at the America First Policy Institute on Wednesday, Republican presidential candidate Vivek Ramaswamy said the balance of power in America has changed over the years.
Three-letter government agencies that wield the most political power in the federal government, despite having the least political accountability, through unelected bureaucrats who have no backstop of actually being accountable to the public.
And he laid forth his plan to restore the constitutional republic, taking aim at the size of the federal workforce as well as certain government agencies.
First, it will be a plan that reduces the size of the federal employee headcount by over 75% if I'm the next president by the end of my first term, 50% of which is implementable by the end of year one.
Some would argue that the president doesn't have that power, but Ramaswamy said that's only a myth. And he read from the 1977 Reorganization Act, which says the president does indeed have that authority.
To reduce the number of agencies by consolidating those having similar functions under a single head, and to abolish, that's not my word, that is a word in the statute, to abolish such agencies or functions thereof.
Ramaswamy said he'd start with the FBI, and he cited information about the Bureau from the Pulitzer Prize-winning book, G-Man.
The same one that used illegally collected tapes to threaten Martin Luther King Jr. into committing suicide, they tried to do, is now being used to target political opponents of a different persuasion.
And he explained what shutting down the Bureau, which has about 35,000 employees, would look like.
They're going to go home when we shut it down and find honest work in the private sector. But 15,000 of those employees are going to be reorganized into the U.S. Marshals, into the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network at the U.S. Treasury, into other parts, the DEA, that are taking on the drug enforcement problems that we have in this country.
He also said he'd shut down the Department of Education.
This is an agency that spends approximately an $80 billion budget per year, telling local schools that they can't get those federal funds unless they adopt toxic racial and gender ideologies.
Some of the other departments Ramaswamy said he'd shut down are the ATF and the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. To watch Ramaswamy's full speech, you can visit ntd.com. Jason Perry, NTD News.
The death toll in Libya continues to climb as the flood enters its third day. The intensity has gone down, but the situation is still critical. Around 6,000 people are now confirmed dead, and more bodies are constantly being found. Morgues are overwhelmed by the dead bodies, and relatives are growing more and more desperate to find loved ones. Thousands of people are still missing. They're likely to have been swept out to sea or are buried underneath rubble. Emergency teams are using construction vehicles to look for them. The mayor of Derna said the death toll could rise to 20,000. He added that he fears diseases will start spreading with so many dead bodies under the rubble. Nearby countries are sending rescue teams, but officials say what they really need is more body bags. The flood began 3 days ago when Storm Daniel inundated northeastern Libya with rain. The situation already dire, the rain then caused 2 dams to break, exacerbating the flood. The International Rescue Committee calls it an unprecedented humanitarian crisis. North Korean leader Kim Jong-un met with Russian President Vladimir Putin today in Russia's Far East. The meeting comes as the U.S. warns that North Korea could be supplying artillery shells to Russia for use in the Ukraine war. An analyst tells NTD what this means.
It is a sign of Russia's desperation. Nobody wants North Korean weapons. There's a famous example. They shelled an island, a South Korean island, a couple of years ago, and in that barrage of artillery shells, only 25 to 30% of them actually hit the target and exploded.
The meeting took place at a Russian spaceport and lasted over 4 hours. Kim declared his full support for Russia and predicted a Russian victory in Ukraine. The two leaders agreed on further developing strategic ties. Putin suggested there could be military cooperation as well. The Russian president is believed to be seeking one of the few things North Korea has in abundance: stockpiles of aging ammunition and rockets. In return, Putin is offering to help North Korea with space satellite technology. The meeting also included a tour of the spaceport. Following the meeting, Kim is expected to continue his visit in Russia, which is his first trip abroad since the pandemic. Welcome back. The White House is asking the media to be critical of the impeachment inquiry against President Biden. It sent a letter urging them to, quote, ramp up scrutiny. The letter from White House spokesperson Ian Sam says that there is no evidence against Biden and that the impeachment inquiry is without merit. The letter has raised concern as it seems to urge news outlets to follow an editorial directive from the White House. The letter was sent out today to top executives at big news outlets like the New York Times, Fox, CNN, and the Associated Press. This comes after House Speaker Kevin McCarthy announced the impeachment inquiry yesterday. It aims to investigate President Biden's involvement with his son's business dealings, calling into question the issue of influence peddling. For further analysis on the Biden impeachment inquiry, we spoke with a former federal prosecutor and public defender. Kash Patel, thank you so much for joining us. Great to have you back on the show.
Thanks for having me.
Now, a White House spokesperson has pushed back, saying, quote, House Republicans have been investigating the president for 9 months and they've turned up no evidence of wrongdoing. To begin, why do you think Leader McCarthy is launching this inquiry now?
Well, that's a slightly complicated answer from my perspective. So having been both a public defender and a public federal prosecutor, I don't think in the 1,000+ criminal cases I ever handled that a criminal that I either defended or prosecuted basically said, here, I did it, here's my crime, and here's all the evidence. What criminal masterminds do is they cover up the crime, and usually how they get caught is not the underlying crime itself, but the cover-up. So when Democrats say that there's no evidence, I have to point them to the $20 million of funding from the CCP cutout affiliates in the Ukraine, from the meeting at Cafe Milano that Vice President Joe Biden had with the mayor of Moscow's wife a week after she sent his kid $3 million. This is evidence of money moving for business-related activities. And now we know Joe Biden was, as vice president, on the phone with Hunter's business associates working these deals. So that is a tremendous amount of evidence. And I think Speaker McCarthy, it ties into his decision-making. He had to move forward with the mountain of evidence to actually get the documentation from FBI and DOJ that Wray and Garland have stonewalled from these committees.
And now there's also been pushback even on the conservative side. Actually, with the National Review, there was a op-ed calling this impeachment inquiry just but unwise. What's your take on this?
Look, I think from a political standpoint, I understand why they want to impeach Biden. I have always said, and I still say this, that the impeachment of Wray and Garland would be of more value to the American people because they have created this two-tier system of justice. They have allowed for Hunter Biden's sweetheart plea deal. They have allowed for the cover-up and the corruption, and it's not the first instance. Not to mention our top two law enforcement officers, Wray and Garland, have come into Congress under oath and lied. And they have failed to turn over documents that have been lawfully subpoenaed by members of Congress and should be held in contempt of Congress. And so I think those two would be a better result for the American public so we can see the documents, force their testimony, and understand why they've lied and covered up for all these years. Joe, I think a lot of the documentation will lead to Joe Biden. And so the impeachment, I think, of him is more political than it is substantive in some sense. But so I can somehow understand why others out there are saying things like that. My preference would have been Wray and Garland first.
And Cash, speaking of the American public, if we look at history here, there have been 3 impeachments of U.S. president. We had Andrew Johnson, Bill Clinton, and of course Trump. None were convicted. What is the impact on the American public with these impeachments?
Well, one, it's a huge expense, and it's a taxpayer-funded investigation, as is any activity by the United States government. 2, the world's eyes will be on this impeachment. So my advice to anyone who takes up this impeachment mantle seriously is utilize it not to advance a political headline, but to garner the information that the American public needs and the world needs to adjudicate this matter. Because this matter is not going to be resolved in the Senate. We know it's not going to result in a conviction. The votes aren't there. Even if you find this quote-unquote smoking gun in the videotape of the fraud and criminality. What the American public needs to see is why the FBI and DOJ have covered up, redacted their corruption in this case, why they sideline IRS investigators after 5 years, why they offered Hunter Biden a deal that is unlawful under DOJ regulations. These are the types of questions Americans want to know because it doesn't apply to them directly, but what they want to know is, why is our leadership, why is our law enforcement community allowing a two-tier system of justice, and am I next?
I want to zoom in on this potential political fallout, especially after the impeachments of President Trump. Are we just going to be starting to see impeachments when each house or party is in power?
And that's a great point. You know, that was the slide that we talked about when President Trump was impeached not once but twice, and now here it's ironic that you have the other side saying, Chuck Schumer is particularly saying it's a witch hunt, which is an interesting use of the phrase for people who want to launch an investigation. And then you'll have the pundits and naysayers saying, well, it's just a political hatchet job. And that is a detraction for Americans, and it's a detraction for the work of Congress when Congress has outstanding work like funding the government to do. And people have said, why is Congress issuing subpoenas and not enforcing any of them? But if you're a Donald Trump supporter, they're enforced against you and you're sentenced to prison. People are tired of this disparate system of justice. And right now, the DOJ and FBI are leading the charge in creating that alternate system of justice. So they can't possibly investigate themselves. So the frustration is, why isn't Congress restoring our sense of justice to America? And I don't know that they will through this impeachment process. We'll see.
And now, switching gears a little and zooming in on Trump, there's been another attempt this week in Minnesota to remove Trump from the ballot in 2024. That's citing the 14th Amendment, which says anyone who engages or aided in insurrection can't run for office. Could this actually succeed in removing Trump from the ballot?
No. The Constitution and the 14th Amendment are federal law of the United States of America. No state secretary of state can come in and utilize that amendment to bar anyone from running for any office, let alone the presidency of the United States. That's the black letter law. Now, turning to the federal courts and the Supreme Court that interpret things like the 14th Amendment and our constitutional amendments, there is not one single case that interprets that amendment to allow for that activity to occur. To me, this is just a politicization and a continued weaponization of justice, and it's the next iteration of how are we going to get Trump. If it's not the indictments, it's going to be the 14th Amendment. If it's not the 14th Amendment, we tried to use it, remember the 25th Amendment, which didn't apply then, to say he was somehow incapable of doing the job and they wanted to wear a wire against him. That would have also been unlawful. They'll come up with something else. the folks that want to sideline Donald Trump, in my opinion, aren't going to stop. This isn't the last we're going to see of it. But when you have folks like Alan Dershowitz come in and actually tell you what the law is on the 14th Amendment, who's no fan of Donald Trump, I tend to believe those credible folks.
Kash Patel, thank you so much for your time.
Hey, thanks so much for having me. Have a great day.
Most Californians are against cash reparations for residents who are descended from slaves. A recent poll reveals that conservatives are pretty united in the opposition, while liberals are mixed. NTD's Eileen Eng has more.
According to a recent poll by UC Berkeley's Institute of Governmental Studies, or IGS, the majority of California voters are opposed to cash reparations payments to Black residents. 59% of voters oppose the State Reparations Task Force recommendation to make cash payments to the descendants of enslaved Blacks currently living in California. Of those who opposed, 44% are strongly against the idea. Democrats and liberals were divided, while Republicans and conservatives were nearly unanimous in their opposition. However, most voters agree that the legacy of slavery is affecting the position of Black Californians. According to the IGS co-director, while many can empathize with the plight of Black Americans, not all of these feelings will translate into support for policies that address long-standing racial harms. In 2020, Governor Gavin Newsom created the nation's first reparations task force to calculate the costs of slavery and racism and how to make up to Black Californians. In July, the task force proposed over 100 recommendations in a 1,000-page document. It also recommends the state pay over $225 billion in reparations.
Mexico could become the first country to speak about the presence of aliens on Earth in a government document. Lawmakers considered evidence today, including small corpses that one researcher calls non-human. According to organizers, these two mummified stuffed bodies were recovered in 2017 in Peru. They are reportedly 700 and 1,800 years old respectively, with only 3 fingers on each hand and elongated heads. The lead researcher said that DNA testing shows many differences from humans. He sees them as clear evidence of aliens, but has previously been refuted by other scientists for some of his related stances. This all happened at Mexico's first public congressional hearing on the proposed aerospace protection law. And if you have any news tips or feedback for the show, you can email us at eveningnews@ntd.com.